Now, tensions are escalating sharply in East Asia. At the center of the latest standoff, the disputed Senkaku Islands, controlled by Japan but claimed by China. Beijing has sent Coast Guard vessels through the waters near the islands, intensifying a territorial dispute that has simmered for years. The Senkaku Islands, they are known as the Diaoyu Islands in China. Japan, which administers these islands, has lodged strong concerns. This as Chinese ships and military drones were also spotted close to Yonaguni, which is Japan's westernmost island, just 110 kilometers from Taiwan. Taiwan's defense ministry says they have detected 30 Chinese military aircraft, 7 Navy ships, and 1 Coast Guard vessel around Taiwan over the past 24 hours. Now, China says that it was conducting a lawful, and this is what they call it, rights enforcement patrol to safeguard national interests. Meanwhile, China's Ministry of Education has issued a study abroad alert for Japan. Beijing has warned Chinese nationals to carefully consider plans for studying in Japan. The ministry pointed to a recent rise in crimes against Chinese citizens in Tokyo. The spat has been sparked by comments which came from the Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi earlier this month. Just last week, Takaichi made parliamentary remarks saying that any use of force by China against Taiwan could constitute a survival-threatening situation for Japan, implying possible Japanese intervention. China reacted strongly, condemning Japan's statements as interference in its internal affairs and warning of severe consequences if Japan intervened militarily in Taiwan. The row over Taiwan has brought long-standing historical grievances between China and Japan and modern security concerns between the two neighbors to the forefront. All right, to discuss Japan's possible change in security policy, or it will stick to its pacifist outlook as it has maintained since World War II. We're now being joined live by Professor Benoit Hardy-Chartrand, lecturer and researcher, Temple University from Japan. We also have with us Andrew KP Leung, chairman and CEO of prominent international China specialist. Let me start with Professor Chartrand. Sir, now just to give viewers a little more context, and you can always add in here, Article 9 of Japan's post-World War II constitution, it echoes its pacifist agenda, essentially meaning that it prohibits Japan from maintaining offensive military forces or use of force to settle international disputes. Now, coming to where things stand right now, China has always seen Taiwan as its own territory. How do you see Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi's remarks suggesting any use of force by China against Taiwan would be a threat to Japan's survival? Is it implying a possible military response from Japan? Is Japan stepping away from its pacifist stance?
Right. Well, there are many angles to your question, but I will just say that in 2015, what happened in Japan is that they reinterpreted the pacifist constitution. And under this reinterpretation of the constitution, Japan's self-defense forces can now basically help their allies militarily, the United States, even though Japan is not attacked directly. This is collective self-defense. And according to this new interpretation, Japan can use its military forces, its self-defense forces, if it deems that the situation is a life-threatening situation for Japan. So in this context, this is why Prime Minister Takaichi was talking about a potential conflict around Taiwan could be considered by Japan a life-threatening or a survival-threatening situation. And by saying that, she was indeed making the implication, even though she didn't say that directly, she was implying that possibly the Japanese self-defense forces could be asked to basically intervene in the case of a conflict to possibly help the United States. Now, it's important to understand also that Japan does not recognize recognize the sovereignty of Taiwan. It does not maintain any diplomatic ties with Taiwan, in line with the one party or one country, one China policy of Beijing. However, for Japanese prime ministers, they've never really said this kind of statement about Taiwan. Japanese prime minister have always been very careful to avoid incurring the anger of Beijing by making that kind of statement. So I would say that this is the big difference here. Even though technically the Japanese policy towards Taiwan and China has not changed at all, this kind of statement, which is new again, was interpreted as very much an interference in Chinese internal affairs. That's why we're seeing this crisis right now.
Professor Chartrand, stay with me. Let me now cut across to our other guest, Andrew KP Leung, who's joining me here on the broadcast. Mr. Leung, your analysis of how Japan has, or the statements or the remarks which have come in and what they imply. And these remarks have come in from the Japanese Prime Minister. Do they imply a change in stance from Japan, and how's China seeing it?
Well, of course, Japan always abides by the one China policy, as the other guests highlighted. But then, of course, the unification of Taiwan, preferably by peaceful means, remains China's topmost agenda. In fact, that there have been separatist elements in Taiwan, pushing Taiwan towards various kinds of independence, and of course the threats upon China's red line, and for other countries to interfere in this matter, of course, obviously angers Beijing. So that's point number one. And point number two, Japan, of course, was seen by Beijing as part of the China containment strategy led by the United States. Don't forget that there are so-called first island chain with American assets centered in Okinawa, second island chain centered in Guam, together with the Quad with Australia and of course India, Japan, trying to contain China in the waters of the Asia Pacific. But the South China Sea is very important to China, not just because of territorial disputes, but because it's an essential conduit of China's lifeblood. Unlike other countries, China depends to a large extent on international trade, but also on importation of materials and commodities, even foodstuffs. And so China has to defend itself, has to maintain very strong defense posture in the South China Sea. And thirdly, what angers China, of course, Japan invaded China at the start of the Second World War, using a fabricated incident on the 7th of July, 1937, which started the wholesale invasion of China, the northeast provinces, using a fabricated incident. That's why at the moment of the worsening relations between China and Japan, what Beijing fears is that with China's nationals visiting Japan, there could be some sort of a fabricated incident dragging China into an unwanted situation. And of course, not China doesn't want a war, nor does the United States. But then some of these hostile rhetoric could easily escalate into uncontrollable or unavoidable and unwanted circumstances.
Mr. Leung, all right, I hear your point. I've taken all your 3 points. I hear them out. Let me just bring in a little more pinpointed perspective here as of now. So we come to the point, survival threatening situations. It's a term that allows Japan's premiers to deploy the country's self-defense forces. Now, the Japanese Prime Minister also gave that example with both Mr. Leung and Professor Chartrand. You mentioned that an attack, and this is what the Japanese Prime Minister said, that as an example, an attack on US warships sent to break any Chinese blockade on Taiwan could also require Tokyo to intervene militarily to defend itself and its ally. Now, is this still within the purview of self-defense, or is it a departure from Japan's pacifist agenda? Mr. Leung, you take this one first.
The question is for me, right?
Yes.
Yes, well, I mean, as I said, the United States doesn't want a war in the Asia Pacific because Taiwan is thousands of miles away, and China has effectively developed a so-called, in military terms, A2AD, very strong strategy. A2AD means the anti-access area denial, meaning that China's using hypersonic missiles, aircraft killer missiles, underwater drones, and long-range sixth generation fighters to deter any kind of intervention on this critical issue of the unification of Taiwan should push comes to shove. As I said, I mean, China's preference is still on peaceful unification, enshrined by 3 successive white papers published by Beijing. The last coincided with Nancy Pelosi's provocative visit to Taiwan. Now, the question is that most Taiwanese people do not want unification, nor do they want do they declare formal independence. But on the other hand, there are separatist tendencies, and sometimes the tendencies are stroked by other nations, and that would plunge both Taiwan and the region into unwanted circumstances. And hence, this very stern warning by Beijing, not against so much the so-called Senkaku, or in China, the Diaoyu Islands, because these disputes have existed for a long time, but as a strong warning against intervention by foreign powers on the long-term plan for peaceful unification with Taiwan.
I hear you. All right. Let me go over to Professor Chartrand. Thanks so much for patiently hearing all this out, of course. But now I want to get your perspective on this, Professor. Would this still be within the purview of self-defense for Japan if there is any kind of intervention between China and Taiwan, or would it be a step away from its stance so far since World War II? Professor Chartrand.
So this is a great question. So first of all, under international law, self-defense, individual self-defense is permitted. Self-defense simply means that you are allowed to use force to defend yourself if you are attacked by another country. Now, collective self-defense, which I referred to earlier, this is when you defend an ally or another country that is being attacked, even though you are not attacked yourself. Now, it's important to understand that collective self-defense is also permitted under international law. Both types of self-defense are allowed. Now, in the case of Japan, what is interesting is under its own interpretation of its constitution, it was not allowed, it did not exercise collective self-defense until 2015. Now, in 2015, decided we are also allowed, just like under international law allows it, we can exercise collective self-defense. Therefore, technically, to answer your question directly, if the United States, under whatever circumstance, it could be it is attacked by North Korea, it could be attacked by China, although that is unlikely. But if there was such a circumstance, if Japan deems this situation to threaten its survival, then it does fall under the category of collective self-defense, which once again is permitted by international law. So it's not necessarily a departure in terms of general practice of international law. It simply is a departure in the sense that Japan, until 2015, did not adhere to this view and had self-imposed a restriction on collective self-defense. So I hope this answers your question, but basically, technically, it does not necessarily constitute a breach of the principle of self-defense because it is collective self-defense.
Professor Chartrand, thanks so much for sharing that insight. And of course, as of now, what the latest reports suggest that communication channels are very much open between Japan and China. There's possibly a meeting of the leadership towards the end of this week at G20 in South Africa. Let's see how this one plays out. Professor Chartrand and Andrew KP Leung, thank you so much for joining us here on Point and Counterpoint.